Okay. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really grateful for the ICT for this opportunity, and at the same time, I'm grateful to Professor Garon for inviting me here. As a young man growing up in Saudi Arabia and reaching the know-it-all yet naive age of 16, I was supposed to be going behind the wheel to prepare for my first driving license test. But instead, I ended up traveling to the Balkans to join the jihad in Bosnia, embarking on a journey that regrettably delayed the process of obtaining a driving license for another 17 years, finally qualifying to drive at the late age of 33. Even though I wasn't qualified to drive at 16, yet I managed to drive my family crazy with worries about my whereabouts when I fled home and boarded a flight to Vienna in the autumn of 1994, heading towards a conflict that I hoped will grant me the wish of never witnessing my 17th birthday. The lure of martyrdom for the sake of the faith and defending victims of ethnic cleansing against vicious onslaught in Bosnia was such a powerful driving force that it blinded me throughout the conflict to the ideological forces that managed the jihad in Bosnia. I wasn't prepared at that age to resist the intellectual, ideological, and theological seduction I and many other young men experienced at the hands of highly skilled and experienced Egyptian Jama'ah Islamiyya veterans of the Afghan jihad. They spared no effort in feeding us the narrative that the war in Bosnia is a new modern crusade against all of Islam, and that the alliance established between the West and the jihadists against the Soviets in the 1980s was over. Soon, the war between Islam and the West will widen beyond Bosnia. As I reached the age of 17, despite trying not to, the conflict in Bosnia was coming to its end. Yet a well-dressed, short and stocky man arrived in late 1995 to tell us that Bosnia is the ideal conflict to have produced well-trained, hardened, and committed generation of jihadists who will finally understand that the real enemy was America and its allies in the West and the Arab world. His name was Khalid al-Sheikh, and he is known globally as Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the infamous architect of 9/11 attacks. He came to Bosnia because he was scouting for talents and for this talent to be the new vanguard of his dream of global jihad against the US, a dream that he shared passionately with the leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. I remember him telling me that after Bosnia, I should head to Afghanistan to join the training camps that are reopening so that I could gain skills that will be useful for the coming conflicts he foresaw. And so I did. Shortly after I arrived to Afghanistan in the spring of 1996, bin Laden landed in Afghanistan, coming from Sudan, and immediately began to build his networks of camps and bases in the country, aided by the Taliban takeover of most of Afghanistan at that same year. Living in Afghan training camps and having to listen to extreme views constantly made the job of recruiting me into Al-Qaeda very easy. The head of bin Laden's bodyguard, Abu Hamza al-Ghamdi, not only used toxic mix of ideology, theology, and politics to induct me into the ranks of Al-Qaeda, but he also used Islamic eschatology to its fullest potential. I knew beforehand how jihadists in Afghanistan, including Al-Qaeda leaders, believed passionately in the old Islamic prophecies and about the epic wars and conflicts. And I knew from the first time I saw Osama bin Laden and heard him speak in Afghanistan in 1996 that the prophecies played an important role in guiding his strategy and shaping his worldview. And by 1997, Al-Qaeda was using the Islamic prophecies for recruitment. How we were about to make history, fulfill Islam's destiny, and restore the caliphate. And that could only happen if we managed to expel the Americans out of the Muslim world by whatever means possible. What is a more powerful motivator than joining an army whose war plans and conflict blueprints were ordained by divine power 14 centuries ago. Throughout my commitment to the cause, I viewed the conflict as the leaders of the global jihad movement has taught us, a battlefield between the vanguards of jihad and the West. But being an annoyingly inquisitive person, I never stopped thinking about the cause I was involved in and where it will lead us. Are we on the right side of history? How big an impact will we make on the wider Muslim world? These questions had their brutal answer in August of 1998, when one of my fellow trainees in Afghanistan, a Saudi, drove a van full of explosives into the US Embassy in Nairobi. The attacks against the US embassies in East Africa shook my conscience and my belief in Al-Qaeda and the righteousness of its mission. While the civilian death toll was tremendous, Al-Qaeda's operational and religious leaders, their reckless lack of regret and concern over massive death toll was alarming, not to mention that they regarded the operation as a successful first shot in a war that will last generations. Somehow, in late 1998, my moral compass was stubbornly pointing me towards a different direction than the one Al-Qaeda was taking. I decided to leave Afghanistan, go back to the Gulf, enroll into university, graduate and become a history teacher. That unfortunately did not happen, much to the relief of my would-be students. Through many twists and turns, I ended up working for the UK intelligence services. It wasn't an easy decision, but future events would prove without a shadow of a doubt that it was the right thing to do. The first British counter-terrorism officer I met told me that it was important to stop any organization that seeks to undermine the nation states for the sake of its empire-building ambition. I thought it was a bit rich that a British officer would be condemning the empire building, given how efficient the British were at empire building themselves. Perhaps it takes one to know one. But it was then that I started to see clearly what is happening to the Muslim world. Throughout the 8 years I worked as undercover for the UK intelligence services in Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Gulf, and Europe, I began to notice a trend. There is no war between Islam and the West. The reality is that I was fighting a war, but it wasn't the war I thought I was fighting. Al-Qaeda wasn't primarily at war with the West, but against other Muslims. And as the years progressed, I came to the conclusion that there is a civil war within Islam, fought by 4 different distinct factions. The first faction is the nation states. With all their faults and shortcomings, yet they are the modern nation states as we recognize them, such as Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Morocco, Pakistan, etc. The second faction is the political Sunni Islam, represented in the Muslim Brotherhood and their allies and global network. The third faction is militant Sunni Islam, such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, the Taliban, and others. And the fourth faction is the political and militant Shia Islam in the form of Wilayat al-Faqih system in Tehran, and its loyal subordinate groups such as Hezbollah and Al-Houthis in Yemen. The last 3 factions may fight each other sometimes and enter into alliances sometimes. But since all are radical transnational ideologies, what they seek is to destroy the nation state, both as an institution and as a concept, so their dark extreme imperial vision for the region will become a reality. All these ideologies use theology, ideology, and eschatology to prey on the ignorant and the vulnerable, to recruit them after erasing their national identity and replacing it with a fanatical belief in their transnational ideology while promising redemption and eternal life to those lost souls as a reward for their sacrifice. No wonder prisons and ganglands are becoming fertile grounds for recruitment. After 8 exhausting years undercover, I decided it was time for a normal life, or so I thought. I found myself exchanging, unfortunately, one form of terrorism to another. I went into banking. My years in the financial sector taught me that all 3 transnational ideologies I highlighted are as creative in managing and channeling their finances as they are creative in the fields of terror, recruitment, and propaganda. The fight, therefore, must be relentless in the fields of ideas, military, intelligence, and finance. And the battle line is drawn. It's not between religions and races. It's between those who believe in the nation state and those who don't. Thank you.